Hello, I'm Kelly McCullen, in tonight for Joe Stewart. Joining us on the panel for this week's discussion, Sugata Mukherjee, editor of the Triangle Business Journal. Joining us on the panel as well, Colin Campbell of the NC Insider and Jeff Tiberi of WUNC. But Sugata, we must begin with you. There's a lot of news of the week. Big news out of Research Triangle Park. What happened?
Well, Kelly, yesterday, the master developers, the Research Triangle Park, the landlords of the park, the Research Triangle Foundation, announced that the master developer that they hired about 3 years ago, their contract has been dismissed. They don't have a chief executive officer either. So I think this is a pretty big development as to what is going on in Research Triangle Park. Just think about this. A few years ago, they did a branding study in which Research Triangle Park was one of the top 2 identifiable indicators for corporations all across the globe. That's how North Carolina was. Bank of America actually was number 1. So having said that, not having a CEO, not having a master developer for one of the most prominent research parks in the world makes you wonder as to what exactly is going on. What is the strategy here? We are trying to find out whether it's the Research Triangle Park Board or the people that work in there.
We being Triangle Business Journal and your team of journalists.
Correct.
What does it matter to the businesses that are already there, working quite well, frankly, whether or not there's a master plan, whether it gets put on hold for a year or 6 months?
Well, the biggest problem in Research Triangle Park, as you know, is it's not North Hills. It is not, the density is just not there. You have all these campuses just sprawled across this huge 6,000 acres or some acres of land, both in Durham County and Wake County. But there is no really a transportation grid where people can walk and live and play, and that's what the master developer was trying to do. So for the people like the IBMs, the employees of IBM, Glaxo, all these big Research Triangle International, RTI, they were looking forward to having all these amenities because it makes their lives easier because they now have to drive everywhere they want to go if they work in RTP.
But it's not done yet. The master plan is still there. Dismissal's a big word. When you dismiss someone as a contractor,
right,
it's a whole lot different than you fulfilled your contract and you went in your direction.
Right. I mean, they didn't have, frankly, they were going to develop an area of Research Triangle Park called the Park Center. And they had these big plans, and they decided that they don't want that developer. Now they are looking for
covering RTP politics, if you will. Tough nut to crack when you're trying to find out what happened or really happened, I guess is what reporters try to sell us on as consumers.
Well, it's all private corporations, most of them are. So, there are some public companies. It's easy to cover them as financially. But what's happening inside the park in terms of whether it's politics or land buys, we haven't had trouble. They have been pretty open in dealing with us in the past.
Let's pull this out to the larger panel. Colin Campbell, well, you're NC Insider being inside the Beltline, but RTP, it does ripple back in downtown Raleigh and in the legislative sphere.
Yeah, absolutely, and certainly as we look at all these incentives deals that are going on with bringing jobs to the area, it's fascinating to see, to what extent is RTP being marketed versus downtown Durham or downtown Raleigh, where you was not attractive to companies at all 10, 15 years ago, and now those are sort of the places to be because places for your employees to live, places for your employees to eat and drink.
Exactly, and millennials don't like to drive, period. So you have these, if you want to build this area as like an IT infrastructure, research of innovation, you're dealing with people that generally would not like to drive. They would bike, they would take public transportation, they would eat, live, do everything around there. And that's where you see this resurgence in downtown Raleigh with corporations as well as downtown Durham.
Right, and hopefully this isn't too far of a stretch. I'm thinking a little bit about Silicon Valley out in California and Mountain View, and you have these big Google and Facebook campuses, but then you also have some of these startups such as like Lyft, right, that are right in the city of San Francisco. So I wonder, 10, 15, 20 years down the road, if we're going to have RTP to whatever extent it manifests and grows, and then we're going to have more, I mean, we already have some of that in downtown Raleigh, right? But more of those pockets and those startups and some of those tech companies, if that's just going to proliferate, because as you mentioned, that's more in line with what the workforce wants.
Exactly. And I think RTP is on the right track. They do understand, I think, that things need to change. You cannot have these giant campuses where people show their security badge, the gates open, you go park your car. You know, that's not tomorrow's workforce. That is not how even corporations are saying they want their employees to be at. So they are sort of on the right track, but they need to get it going.
But fellas, let's talk about the bigger picture here. If I live in the mountains or I live out on the coast, why do I care about RTP not having a contractor to lay in that master plan, or a CEO? Why does it matter to me?
Well, I mean, for one, you know, I don't know whether the entire state should care about what is happening with RTP. I think it's more of a triangle and perhaps all the mega corporate centers, if you may, of North Carolina. The big money. It is more of a big players. You know, this population, for example. You know, I think we all know. What was that? 41 counties, Colin. That
they're losing population just in the last year or so. And a lot of that is people who grow up in a small town in North Carolina, they get a college degree, and then they're looking for a job in the city. And if they stay in North Carolina, odds are they may go into the Triangle or Charlotte or the Triad and getting a job in RTP or in one of the cities where some of these companies seem to prefer over RTP.
And that's a connection.
Good segue. We're talking big money, Jeff Tiberi. We've got a state budget law now in effect. It's many pages, many more than I admit I've read. Maybe you've read every page.
Every page.
Lay out this. Was it good for business? Is it good for the economy? Good's not a term it's subjective.
Of course, it is subjective. This is a $23 billion budget that, you know, we've talked about on the program before. It gives raises to state employees and teachers. It offers a pretty big tax cut or tax reduction, $530 million over 2 years, and it sets money aside. The Republicans who pushed forward with this budget, passed it, then overrode the governor's veto. They say that if you look at those big items in terms of savings and raises and reducing taxes, North Carolina is in a relatively small minority of the states in this country that they are able to do that. A lot of states have not been able to do that because revenues have not met projections. In North Carolina, partially because of the growing population and an increase in workforce, a drop in unemployment, has been able to reach those thresholds, and we're able to pass a budget that the Republicans say is a great budget. Of course, on the other side is the governor and many of the Democrats who say it doesn't do enough for teachers, it does not do enough for the middle class. One of the points that the governor made was he was very critical of the earmarks, all the pork that was in this bill, something that's happened under Republican and Democratic leadership, and something that has happened again because there's more money. There isn't a shortfall, and there's more money to toy with.
Teacher pay raises in school. That's the easy campaign fodder type stuff. You're the insider.
Yeah.
Go under the hood of this budget. What stands out for you from a corporate and business perspective?
You know, I think the biggest thing in this budget from the economic perspective is actually the incentives piece of this. This didn't get a whole lot of attention when it was going through. It wasn't any other bills. It just showed up in the final budget, and this is creating a more generous incentive package to what the state is terming transformative projects, something with thousands of jobs, tens of millions of dollars worth of investment in this state, and they're going to get a better incentive package. This seems to be aimed at one of these mega manufacturers that may be coming to one of the mega sites that the state has been marketing without a whole lot of success for years. And apparently, from what we hear from the politicians, they're fairly close. I think the House Speaker described it as on the cusp of landing something with thousands of jobs going to one of these possibly rural sites. So that could have a huge impact on the state's economy, and particularly in these areas outside the Triangle and Charlotte area where people are really looking for some of these more blue-collar jobs.
Sagata, are you buying or selling on that idea that something big is just on the horizon if we just get this incentive package?
Oh, well, that's a debate that I think everybody has had over the years as to whether incentives really bring jobs, or it's really the labor base, the quality of life. But I am sort of curious as to, it seemed like, you had a legislature that sort of knew what it was doing, did not really care as to what the governor had to say, because they knew it does not matter. Did that result in sort of, okay, we're going to push these 5 items, we really don't care, about these 10 items. Do you sense that happen? Maybe that's why it sort of felt like it is going really smoothly. There was hardly any sort of a contrarian viewpoint from anybody?
Yeah, I mean, I think they knew going in that Cooper was probably going to be opposed to it, and he would seize on some of the items that would politically be something that could be used in campaigns next year. Things like the earmarks and pork spending that Jeff mentioned. Things like the cuts to the Attorney General of the governor's office. That was sort of the political side of the things. While at the same time they knew they had the money to do the tax cuts and the teacher raises that Republicans will be able to use on the campaign trail next year.
I would say, let's remember a couple things. Pat McCrory was governor a year ago. They didn't pay much care to Pat McCrory. He was a Republican. I mean, they did as they wanted because they didn't really need his support. I mean, having an override veto threshold of 3/5, which was something that came up again this week in some of the reports online, it's a low threshold for having to override a veto. It makes the governor relatively weak. And when Governor Cooper, then Attorney General, was elected, he was somewhere in the neighborhood of 45th, 46th in the country in terms of power, and one month, right? After the legislature went in and removed some of his powers, Governor Cooper is the least, or one of the 2 or 3 least powerful governors in the country. He doesn't have a high card to play here.
Is Governor Cooper playing weak though, or is he trying to play as strong a hand as he can play?
I think he's certainly talking strong. And again, this sets the stage for 2018 because his biggest goal is to break that veto-proof majority. Right. And with redistricting, he probably has a decent shot at it if Democrats have a good year in 2018 in the House. Yes, and that would be enough to where he would have more power and more leverage in the final 2 years of his term to really have a say in the budget and sort of steer the Republicans to perhaps more of his initiatives than were included in the budget this year.
So overall, the business community, good for the budget. I mean, the budget good for the business community this year?
I would think so. We're going to have a corporate tax cut from 3% down to 2.5% beginning in
changes to the
2019.
franchise tax, which has a lot of impact on a lot of the companies in the state. So
I haven't heard anything negative. Correct me if you have from the business community as it pertains to this budget.
Absolutely.
How will the voters who elect legislators, how will they see it? Business community aside, will the business community affect mom and pop Tar Heel when they go to the ballot box, or are there other considerations in this budget they'll look at?
It's hard to say. I mean, I think a lot of it depends on the messaging that comes out. When you have a 400-page budget, no one really knows what the things that will stick in people's memories when we get into campaign season. And I think there's a variety of things that can be seized on in this budget by both sides politically.
Thank you, gentlemen. Last word to you, Sugata. What will the business community remember about this budget? What will they be thinking heading into 2018?
Well, it's 18 short months before the next big election, so I think I think Jeff and Colin are absolutely right. I think what we hear from the business community was, and I think our next presenter would be able to sort of shed additional light on this. It was a good budget for them.
Let's hear the journalist take on the analysis there, but there's nothing like a real world perspective.